Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Normcast, the only cast on the internet with Norm. I'm your host, Norm Scott, and today we are going to be drawing a monolith of some sort. This piece is for an upcoming Shu and Chang cartoon. I won't go into too many details because this one's going to be kind of a long time coming, so this is a very, very, very early preview. But this will be a ruined obelisk found inside a ancient spider temple. Look, I need some imagery to accompany the audio. They can't all be winners. Anyway, moving along today, how's everybody doing out there? I can't actually hear you. Sorry for the deception. You can put it in the comments. I will nod at it later. So today, let's talk about some retro gaming. And I will bring this up because I myself had a hankering to play Jet Set Radio Future, because I remember really liking it, haven't played it in a long time, and it's not available. You cannot find it anywhere. I haven't found a specific reason for it not being available, but I would assume, given its reliance on its soundtrack, that it is probably music licensing issues, which is a terrible shame, not just because of Jet Set Radio Future itself, but in terms of general video game preservation. Because you are seeing these same kind of licensing issues halting, like literally halting sales of old games, or when they do reissues, like the Grand Theft Auto Definitive Editions that came out a while back. Granted, they had a host of other issues that were causing problems, but they also had to cut out some very iconic tracks from Vice City, at the least. I know they also got some stuff from San Andreas. Presumably 3 also got hit. And you regularly hear this happening about a host of other games. I'm not going to go dig through the files, because the entire point of this series is some low-effort audio that I can crank out on the regular, so don't make me go do research. But it is very weird, because this sort of thing, when it happens, it seems to always be happening to video games. I can't pretend to know the legal minutiae behind game releasing versus like cinematic reissues, but it does seem that when a movie is released, it somehow has managed to negotiate the terms of the music licenses in perpetuity, whereas with video games, I mean, you don't hear about Goodfellas getting pulled off of video store shelves because Tony Bennett's goons came around demanding more money for rags to riches. Granted, part of that is because there are no longer any video store shelves. Anyway, again, I do not know the minutiae of music licensing for video games versus other media. It just seems odd that a remarkably large number of publishers are negotiating music rights without any consideration that people might still want to play these games 10 years later, or 21 years later, as in the case of Jet Set Radio Future. Jeez, Lou, that was... Please enjoy my real-time midlife crisis. Anyway, long story short, could not find Jet Set Radio Future anywhere. Xbox Store, Steam, it is lost to the ages. I do actually have an Xbox disc copy of it somewhere, and my understanding through the reading was that they actually did add backwards compatibility to it up to Xbox 360, but not Xbox One and beyond. Which, thanks a lot, you guys. Anyway, as a stopgap measure, I went ahead and got, on Steam, I got the original Jet Set Radio from the Dreamcast days. Now, this one does appear to be an anniversary edition. It has been scaled up. It's widescreen. It's higher definition. But otherwise, it is the game I remember, and I do remember it pretty vividly, which is one of the reasons I was going for Jet Set Radio Future, because that one is a lot foggier in my memory. I have a feeling that was coming out at a time when I was distracted by other games, so it would have been a more fresh experience for me. Sorry for my sour grapes leaking in here. I just really wanted to play Jet Set Radio Future. But because I couldn't, we're going to talk about Jet Set Radio. And what I can tell you now, looking back on it from right now, 2023, is that the game holds up. Now, like I said, as you know, it is Jet Set Radio was a Dreamcast game originally. Originally released in... Okay, I'm doing a little research. Originally released in 2000, and it was originally released in North America under the title Jet Grind Radio, which I remember. I actually was doing work for Electronic Gaming Monthly at this point, and I do remember making some Jet Grind Radio jokes at the time. But yeah, thankfully they reverted to the Japanese title, which is good. For the most part, if the Japanese title is already in English, there's usually not much reason to change it over. In all of history, there have only been a couple times when the localized English name is better than the original Japanese English name. And the only one that immediately comes to mind right now is Castlevania, which is a much, much cooler name than Dracula X. Although Dracula X would be a reasonable name for a hip-hop artist. Anyway, talking about Jet Set Radio, the original. Now, like I said, the version that I got was upscaled. It's higher resolution. They had some bells and whistles so far as unlockables, but it was pretty much the original game as it was released, just in widescreen. The character models, the textures, the polygon count, pretty much untouched, and that is I think it is a testament to the art style that it really does not feel like an ancient game when you play it. Granted that any flat textures are horribly muddy and pixelated, but the cel-shaded art style covers a myriad of sins. When you've got simple flat textures moving around the entire thing, you don't have to worry about color gradations or painted baked textures getting muddy or pixelated. A yellow block at 200 resolution upscales exactly the same as a yellow block at 4000 resolution. That's not to say that you can't get tired of this style. There's a definite oversaturation of flat shaded game textures inside, for instance, modern VR games for like the Meta Quest, working as a buffer against the low performance specs of the machine itself. But for this game individually, which already had a flat, very vibrant color style, it aged extremely well. Now, as I said, the gameplay does still hold up. It has been described before as a graffiti game, but that's only true so far as the theming goes. The actual gameplay is more in the style of a light version of like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. You're grinding rails, you're jumping, you sometimes do some mid-air tricks. The graffiti portion, as complicated as that gets, is literally just moving the thumbsticks in set directions by on-screen indicators. Granted that in this game specifically, theming is very important. That is, the flavor of the game is the game itself. And what is the flavor of the game, you ask? Hardcore Japanese skate punk posers. Okay, so elephant in the room is that even at the time of the release, from one who was there, it was kind of acknowledged that the game was trying just a little too hard to be cool and hip. It wasn't quite at the level of putting on a pair of sunglasses, turning a chair around backwards, sitting down and telling you kids about the dangers of vaping. But there is always going to be a certain level of cognitive dissonance at work when a software engineer tries to lay out what's cool. And so even with the art stylings and the acknowledged soundtrack work of Hideki Naganuma, the principal characters of Jet Set Radio still had the look of somebody who'd kind of annoy you if you crossed them at the mall. Thankfully, the only character that actually had any extensive dialogue was DJ Professor K. And while his lines were, yeah, it was part of the regular flavor of the game, and it was not all-encompassing. You didn't have to dodge it endlessly like the protagonist of Forspoken. Anyway, those elements, they are still there. It's still, that still makes up a significant portion of the game. But my attitude over time, as a person who is well out of his 20s, I have gained a weathered perspective on coolness, and I can tell you now with a degree of certainty that nobody is actually cool. However we strive, however we craft our fashion, at the end of the day, in the eyes of the heavens, we are all a guy sitting backwards on a chair telling teenagers about the dangers of vaping. Anyway, the inherent dorkiness of Jet Set Radio is a moot argument at this point. It's 23 years old, And at a certain point, every trend becomes absorbed into the fabric of history, and it all becomes your grandfather dancing the mashed potato in a pair of shiny black shoes and slicked back hair. At that point, you can either stand at the sidelines and point and jeer, or you can get down onto the dance floor and do the mashed potato yourself. Only one of these things is actually fun. Anyway, Jet Set Radio, still worth it. I think a regular price on it right now is something like $8, so if you haven't played it and you got the price of a medium combo to spare, give it a shot. Okay, so next up, we are going to fill up some airtime by reading some weird news found in the dark heart of Reddit. The first bit of weirdness, if you are a follower of unusual things, as I would assume you probably are if you're here, then there's a good chance you're already familiar with the Fiji Mermaid. If you are not, the Fiji Mermaid was a scientific specimen that was acquired by none other than legendary showman and circus owner P.T. Barnum. This scientific specimen represented a real live mermaid. Except not so much the live part. In fact, it was a horrible, gnarled, mummified mermaid, purportedly purchased off of either Japanese or Dutch sailors. The specimen really looked more like if Yoda had been half-eaten by a fish and then left out in the sun for 100 years. It was blackened and withered with age. The front half was kind of small for the body. The back half looked pretty much like the back half of a tuna. P.T. Barnum exhibited the Fiji Mermaid for many, many years, delighting and horrifying the cryptid curious masses with this evidence of a real mermaid. Except, okay, jig is up, you may have caught onto this around the part where P.T. Barnum was mentioned, or possibly at mention of a real-life mermaid, if you're a real killjoy. But no, the Fiji Mermaid was a fake. The description from Wikipedia: the Fiji Mermaid was an object composed of the torso and head of a juvenile monkey sewn to the back half of a fish. It was a common feature of sideshows where it was presented as the mummified body of a creature that was supposedly half mammal and half fish, a version of a mermaid. The original had fish scales with animal hair superimposed on its body, with pendulous breasts on its chest. The mouth was wide open with its teeth bared. The right hand was against the right cheek and the left tucked under its lower left jaw. This mermaid was supposedly caught near the Fiji Islands in the South Pacific. Several replicas and variations have also been made and exhibited under similar names and pretexts. P.T. Barnum exhibited the original in Barnum's American Museum in New York in 1842, but it then disappeared, likely destroyed in one of the many fires that destroyed parts of Barnum's collection. The Wikipedia article goes on to say that Barnum, in his autobiography, described the mermaid as an ugly, dried-up, black-looking diminutive specimen about 3 feet long. Its mouth was open, its tail turned over, and its arms thrown up, giving it the appearance of having died in great agony, a significant departure from traditional depictions of mermaids as attractive creatures. And while I'm sure that's technically true, remember that sailors have routinely mistaken manatees for mermaids as well, meaning that those beauty standards can't be all that high to start with. Anyway, that's the basic story of the Fiji Mermaid. But did you know that the Japanese have had their own version of the Fiji Mermaid that predated this one by approximately 100 years? Allegedly caught off the coast of the Japanese island of Shikoku between 1736 and 1741, this mermaid, similarly gnarled and mummified as is the way with mermaids and their poor shelf life, has been on display in a glass case in a temple in the city of Asakuchi for decades. At the temple, the mermaid has been the subject of both veneration and curiosity for a long time, but very recently, the Shikoku mermaid, as it is not referred to in the Metro article, but seems like it deserves a name after a couple hundred years, the Shikoku mermaid was recently subject to a variety of analytic tests to determine whether or not it was actually composed of organic material. Researchers from the Kurashiki University of Science and the Arts used CT scans and other high-tech tests to determine that the creature is made of cloth and paper and contained no actual skeleton. It did have some actual fish parts, specifically fins, attached to it at some point, both on the head and tail, but the university's tests have concluded that the mermaid is man-made. So, okay, fine, I guess probable fake turns out to be an actual fake. Does not really qualify as weird news. But I will tell you what this news story did do. It filled up about 5 minutes of airtime. Oh, also, radiocarbon dating of the fins showed that it was probably assembled in the late 1800s, which means that the history of it being caught in the 1740s has also turned out to be just ballyhoo, and that it was most likely predated by the Fiji mermaid. So, there it stands, just another cheap Pacific knockoff of our Western innovation. Buy American. Okay, final story. As detailed in an article in the Global Times, China is now deploying a new force in the war on narcotics, drug-sniffing squirrels. That's right, this initial team of narcotic sniffers consists of 6 highly trained Eurasian red squirrels. This is apparently something of an experimental endeavor, with squirrels selected because they are small and agile, can reach areas, particularly very tall areas, that traditional drug-sniffing dogs cannot. According to the article, when the squirrels encounter suspected drugs, they signal their trainers by scratching. The article does not explicitly say that the scratching is adorable, but it's clearly implied. If this endeavor does not eventually result in an action movie, I will be severely disappointed. And okay, I think that is all the time that we've got for today's episode. Once again, this is Norm Scott. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to support more endeavors of this sort, the best thing you can do is open up your wallets and fork over some cash to our Patreon. Link is in the description below. However, there's a lot you can do without sacrificing any of your hard-earned cash, and that includes liking, subscribing, hitting the notification button, and leaving a comment down below to let the algorithm know you actually watched the video. Until next time, this is Norm, bidding you all a very good evening. Y'all take care. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.